All right, YouTube. This is an impromptu watch party. Say hello when you get into the chat. I'm going to take a bit of time to invite all of our beautiful people on Facebook. Yeah, how y'all doing? I'm feeling good. I'm doing my juice binge diet for 7 days. So I think I'll probably cut 10 pounds in 7 days. Last time I did it, well, I'm thinking of maybe even doing 2 weeks, but last time I did it, I cut like 15 pounds very quickly. All right, gonna share that there. Tell me how you guys are doing. And then I will share on the Pangburn page. We are doing part 3. We are now at the Q&A of Matt Dillahunty versus Jordan Peterson. This watch party was unannounced. I just decided to log on and thought we would pound this thing out with whoever is available. Oops. Let's share with the Twitterverse. What up, what up, what up? Welcome, welcome to everyone who is here. Say hello when you get into the chat. I really appreciate it. There we go. I'll share that there. Maybe I'll do a quick Instagram video. Why not? What character should I do? Okay, let's shoot this thing. Hey, Instagram, it's your favorite guy. I don't know. I don't know why I do these things. We are live. YouTube.com/Pangburn. It is a watch party. It is debating. It is having conversations. It is having fun. So come and join us. We are live right now. YouTube.com/Pangburn. Be there or be triangle. All right. I'm an idiot. Hey, Instagram, it's your favorite guy. I don't know. I don't know why I do these things. We are live. Okay. I'll just put our tag in there. Yeah, if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, I'm going to be doing a lot more like comedy and like my day of routine stuff on there. So just so you'll get something different on that stream. But yeah, you'll probably get to know me better than you've ever wanted to get to know me on that stream. But who cares? Okay, that's good. John Laurie, yo, what up? Franklin Spees says this was a great one. Yes, probably my favorite event I've ever produced. I love, I loved this conversation so much. Just so much awesome material packed into 2 hours for sure. Jim Ward says doing a good job with these. Yeah, I'm loving the watch parties. To begin with, a lot of haters around. Travis is just keep going over old content. Well, fuck you. I like watching this with people who want to watch this with me and have interesting conversations. So, like, stop complaining. uh, Thinking Sapien. Lucas Latour says, hello, just followed you on Twitter. Hey, thanks. Yeah, and if you guys want to follow me, I'm on every social media platform basically except TikTok. I haven't got that going yet. Someone told me I should. Then you would see some really absurd theatrical aspects of my personality. Yeah, so I noticed I've just been doing the juice this like juice diet thing for I think probably let's see, maybe like 30 hours now. And I've noticed the general inflammation in my body is like so low, like everything feels like so tight. Like I don't feel bloated at all. It's kind of crazy. But I remember this being that way when I did this the last time. Um, but yeah, I ended up cutting weight really quickly last time I did this. Thinking Sapien says, at Pangburn, I've been feeling like a stalker of yours. I just find you really interesting. Aw, shucks. Neil B says, my pleasure drive is off. I've heard that one finger in the rectum. Jim Ward says, I've listened to this at least half a dozen times every time I pick up something new. Yeah, this conversation I think is going to be talked about and used in future philosophy courses at the university level uh, for years. I think that there's a lot, and you get to see the emotional like not necessarily to a point where they lose hold on their logical centers, but the emotional outrage aspect of each character as they're going through this conversation on stage. I think it's really interesting. Please hit the like button. We got 26 in the room right now, guys. Please hit the like button on this stream. We're going to just get going right away. We're going to jump right into it. I'll be interacting with you guys' comments. If you've never been here before, please subscribe. Really appreciate it. We have a lot of fun. That comment, two in the pink. Let's get started on this. Oh, it said no data all of a sudden. Oh, okay. Now it says we're back. Cool. Well, let's rock and roll.
One's actually up like, yes, where that guy, oh my gosh, he's lit up where we can see him. A couple quick notes about questions. And by the way, thank you. This has been great. And
thank you.
We'll talk some more. This is where I get to.
Okay, the first Fish Jungle 9 says, when are you going to do another update? Update for what? Oh, you mean debate. Not sure yet. I'm looking at some different ways that I can bring some virtual debates to you guys. I'm not a big fan of them, to be honest. There is something a lot different of having the two debaters in person together in the same room. Not a huge fan of the over the webcam thing, but maybe we'll do a few things like that. I'll definitely be bringing a few guests on for sure. So yeah, let's get on this. I wanted to stop this because this first question for Jordan really does show how Jordan actually is an atheist. He's not a theist, but he is obviously a cultural, metaphorical believer in Christianity, in the Christian God, from a metaphorical standpoint. But this question is brilliant, and I love it.
Have a bit of fun. Couple notes about questions for those of you who know I do a live TV show where I can hang up on people, and if you think I can't hang up on you here, you are much mistaken. But I don't. I hope to never have to do that, and almost everybody's gone along questions end in a question mark, and the kind of questions we're looking for don't start with a dissertation or life story. So you can say your name if you'd like to. If you don't, that's fine, and then say who your question's for or both. And I will make a promise that I make every time and break, but I will try not to break it tonight, which is I will do my best to give shorter answers so that we can get to everybody who's asking questions. But they lit you up first, sir. Thank you, and the floor is yours for a moment.
All right, thank you. I guess this question's mostly for Jordan Peterson. Just to hopefully enlighten a bit more what you mean by God, do you think that if all humanity were to cease to exist, does God still exist?
I don't think I know how to answer that. It's just, the situation is too hypothetical. I mean, I can take a crack at some of it, but
How is the situation too hypothetical? It's a weird, rare step back defense, kind of closing yourself in, walling yourself up from Jordan that you don't normally see. Yeah, if the vid's a little quiet, I'm going to boost it a little bit here. Jordan spends a lot of time
so
thinking
human
on this
beings are characterized by consciousness and by self-consciousness, and the latter in particular seems to be something relatively unique. There's some vague evidence for self-consciousness of lower sorts in animals, but it's not very compelling. Some of them can recognize themselves in a mirror, but our self-consciousness is accompanied by elaborated imagistic and linguistic models of ourselves and that have been elaborated over large spans of time. There are lots of elements of being that would disappear if we disappeared. Now, and it isn't even obvious to what extent that's true, right?
There are a lot of elements of being that would disappear if we were no longer here. Sure. Yeah, the I guess the metaphysical stuff, right?
Because I don't really understand to what degree being itself is dependent on consciousness. Like the classic materialist Enlightenment view, which I would say is basically a 19th century view, something like that, is that if all consciousness was extinguished, the material substrate of the universe would continue unchanged. But I don't really buy that as an argument, because I think that the material substrate, I think that reality is I think that reality is an interaction between what we perceive of as the material substrate and consciousness itself. And so then when you destroy consciousness, you destroy reality. And what that leaves, I don't really understand.
Choking.
Because it doesn't have any temporality in any obvious sense. It doesn't have any size in any obvious sense without the introduction of an invisible observer.
If you don't have consciousness, everything is still here besides consciousness, right? When the Big Bang happened, as far as we know, no consciousness for billions of years. So it's not like reality is contingent on consciousness.
So lots vanishes without human consciousness and self-consciousness. I don't know how to answer the question, does God vanish? Because that brings us back into the same problem that I was talking about earlier, is that it's not exactly easy to understand what people are talking about when they say God. You know, because when you ask the question, would God disappear? There's an assumption there that whatever God is understandable and boxable, like a simple concept, like a chair, and that we both share the same conception. And, you know, there's endless warnings in deep religious literature against assuming that you understand what that term means, or sometimes even for using the term. So that's the best I'm going to be able to do with that question.
Thank you.
I have to go clear my throat, guys. I'll be right back. All right. I don't know what happened there. Something went down the wrong tube.
Hey there.
Okay, let's go over how Jordan answered that question. NY says solid non-answer from Peterson there. NY says almost sounded like he said something, but he just kind of lazily rambled through some fairly basic and common ideas to arrive at a non-relevant conclusion. Yeah, I think the point is that Jordan didn't want to concede that without a human mind, human concepts, or at least a mind capable of imagining the concept of God. Let's call it, I don't know how someone would describe it, the greatest good or whatever. That that big idea in Jordan's mind just wouldn't exist anymore if no human minds existed. Joss Donnelly says, I believe JP got lucky in the right place at the right time. This may seem harsh, but his downfall is kind of ironic in light of his rules for life. I thought it was a very condescending book. RonFan69 says, you say it's not like the world is contingent on consciousness, far too flippantly, as it's a respectable philosophical position to make, and one which has been often, just because it's been made often doesn't mean it's a We're just reconnecting, guys. Okay, I think we are good. Okay, I switched networks. All right, guys, make sure you hit that like button. Sorry, I'm just checking some weird notification here. Okay, let's keep going.
So my question is about something that Matt said, but I'd actually like to get Dr. Peterson to address it first, if that's okay. So Matt, you said that some people are not willing to put in the work of developing sort of their own moral system, and they like turn to religion to free them from the burden of that thought. But doesn't it make sense on some level to view religion as like an archival system that holds truth? Like if we abandon that, are we not then just in a place where everyone is forced to invent their own morality for themselves throughout their life, and then like a baby born has to try to achieve that again? Like
Bad
that
question.
That seems like, from an operative level, just an impossible system to set up that would ever get you anywhere. So I'm just wondering how you would resolve that conflict.
That was Nietzsche's critique, essentially.
Well, I'm not trying to set up the system. I think the system's already set up. So my goal is not to rid the world of religion. That's just a fortunate side effect from my goals. My goal is to have the best understanding of reality that I can, and for other people to do so as well. Now, when I talk about religion, there are things within religious histories, within religious teachings that are passed down, which are true and good and useful. And there's no reason to think that any of those things would go away if we stopped believing in a God, because they are true and good and useful whether there is a God or not. Yes. If the thing that we're worried about is, and I've asked people before, and I apologize if anybody is bothered by this, but there are people who are like, oh, if you don't believe in a God, what keeps you from running around raping and killing people? And I was like, so if you became convinced today that your belief in God was unfounded and you were forced by reason to give it up, would you run around and start doing that? And there are people who will say yes, and I hopefully, optimistically don't believe them, but we know that there are people who do that. But the truth about what is good and useful is true whether a particular religion survives or not. And we don't lose that because children aren't born with an understanding of morality. They learn that. They are educated by their parents. They are taught. They explore the world. Everybody does, in fact, go through the effort of creating and understanding their own morality. It's just that we adopt things from figures around us who show evidence that they are smarter and understand this better as a shorthand. We ride on the shoulders of giants. The curious question is, and I ask this for people ostensibly who are Christian, who believe in both a God and a devil, is how did you decide that God was the good one and the devil was the evil one? Because the model is that, well, God wrote his moral code on your heart, and that's how you tell. But if that's the case, then whether or not, if the devil had written his moral code on your heart, you would be saying he was the good one. The truth is, you are using your internal, personal, subjective assessments to determine that God is the good one,
Yes.
or this religion is the right one,
100%.
or the First Baptist Church got it right, or the Second Baptist Church got it right, or this is the preacher we should hire.
the Hindus
This
got
is
it
what
right.
we do. And I don't see much value in worrying about, oh, is it all going to go away, when it's clear it doesn't, because secular individuals are no more immoral or criminal-minded than anybody else. In fact, there may be some cases to show that we're less.
But in this society, they are no more criminally minded. Like, we have a religious foundation, right? Like, I wouldn't go around, like, raping and pillaging if I abandoned God, but there were societies that did when they didn't have that structure. So how do you resolve that?
I'm not saying that religious authorities haven't been used.
The point here is that morality is subjective. A lot of people don't want to say that. It's a really uncomfortable feeling to say that, in some societies, it may be morally acceptable in that society to have sex with children or to sacrifice children to the whatever god to ensure a clear sailing. Like, it's all subjective, people.
It's just that what I hear from some people is that we should keep this because of that particular usefulness, because they fear what will happen otherwise, because what they've seen in the past. And I don't buy that, because that boils down to saying, I may not need religion, but you people do. And that is far too arrogant for me to ever adopt as a position.
Okay,
So
I don't want to take up too much time, but did you want to speak
I
to
have
that?
a quick comment on riding around on the shoulders of giants, which was the central theme in Matt's answer. We ride around on the shoulder of giants, and the meta-giant is God. That's a very good way of thinking about it.
Except that I can identify.
We can think about that as, I don't care about the metaphysical implications of that. I don't have to care about that at the moment. But if you look at the evolution of the idea of God, for example, and I think this is particularly true with the evolution of the idea of Christ, is that we do ride around on the shoulders of giants, and the figure of Christ, psychologically speaking, is the giant among giants. It's a meta-giant, and it's a ritual model for emulation. And the ritual model is something like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it nobly, which is a metaphysical statement in some sense that lies at the bottom of the ethic even that Matt is presenting. And so it is deeply embedded in a religious substructure. And that's the metaphorical substructure that I was talking about that necessarily underlies these self-evident axiomatic rules, which are not by any means, as you point out, self-evident in the least. There's plenty of cultures that train their young men to be absolutely barbaric monsters, right? Warriors, killers, rapists, right? Bloodthirsty right to the core. Perfectly viable mode of being, arguably speaking, from the perspective of generating a set of axiomatic rules. Why is it not better to have 10,000 women than one? There's an evolutionary question for you. Well, reasonable people wouldn't do that. Oh, yeah, right. Reasonable people. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if it's not clear, I can point to the giants. I can't point to the mega giant.
It's because it's an abstraction.
Sure, but when you hold Christ up as a particular figure, the only information that I have about Jesus comes from the Bible. And rather than going through all of it again, because there's lots of people with questions, if you go to ironchariots.org, you will find a verse-by-verse deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount where I point out that Jesus gave some good advice and some crappy advice and some questionable advice, and that's not enough. And there's not a secular humanist organization or country on the planet that has ever produced as a good thing, an intentional good thing, rapists and murderers. So,
Well, that's highly debatable. That's highly debatable.
actually,
one of
it's
the things
absolutely true because there's never been a secular humanist government on the planet.
I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty secular.
No,
humanist.
Then,
I know that-
with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is. You should read the Secular Humanist Manifestos, because what happened in Russia and communist countries was an institution of a religious-like structure centered around an individual and forced atheism, none of which is consistent with humanism. None of it. And we can talk about this later, and I'll be happy to point you to this, because you can say that it was an atheist thing that went awry, but you can't call it secular humanism. It's just not there. There's no humanism in what was done there. But
I'm one of those who believes that there's no such thing as an atheistic thing or a non-religious.
Vic Vaughn. JP is to Christ as turd is to ass. Oh, I love the chat.
Religious thing. I was listening to your talk at Lafayette, Peterson. You can call it God, you can call it a transcendent ideal, call it an axiom, call it presupposition. It's just very hard to communicate to them that implicitly or explicitly it's there. You're aiming for it. Maybe it changes, maybe it doesn't, but it's that fundamental thing that guides your action. And my question would be, you keep Dillahunty did a very
The fundamental thing that guides your action. I'm sorry, you just don't understand human biological systems.
good job of saying pragmatically, okay, fair enough, the axioms could change, maybe we try those, but there's always going to be an axiom. It's a transcendent thing because it's always changing, so we all have that. So again, the definition of God is just kind of useless, but maybe you want to explore why there is a partial definition of God that makes all actions religious, makes all ideals you're approaching for a form of God worship, whether you want to call it that or not. I hope that's coherent.
Well,
So.
Carl Jung had some very interesting comments about that. He said, psychologically, for all intents and purposes.
Hey guys, we got 54 of you in the room right now. Please hit the like button on this stream. It really helps the channel out. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Would love to have you. We do watch parties like this all the time. And yeah, they're a lot of fun. And I jump online once in a while just to have conversations, general conversations as well. So yeah, I hope you subscribe.
Your God is the highest value that you have. Right? It serves functionally as your deity. Now, you may not clothe it in a personified manner, although you tend to, because you tend to act it out and assume that other people should too. So it implicitly has a personified form. But if it performs all the functions of a deity, let's say, then it's importantly related in some sense to a deity. And I think that that's actually technically true if you look at how human cognitive structure works. I don't think it's escapable.
Does that make sense to you, Phil, or is that like I don't feel I've ever been
No,
an
see,
atheist
when you
expressly
said you have
understand
difficulty explaining this to atheists, I don't know what atheists you've been talking with, but I'm right on board, and I functionally understand and can agree with this. So secular humanism can easily be viewed as a religion. The U.S. Supreme Court has defined it in the sense of pursuit for ultimate answers to ultimate questions or things like that. But if you want to say that my God is truth or goodness or whatever thing. I'm fine with that in a poetic, even metaphorical sense. The problem is when you talk about if what you believe in fulfills all the roles of a deity, I think you're sidelining what a lot of the roles of a deity have played throughout the entirety of human history. Because they're advocating, many of them, not all, most, I would say, are advocating for an actual thinking agent, supernatural, that is the creator and or sustainer of the universe. And nothing about my pursuit of truth or goodness or secular humanism fills that particular role.
Josh Donnelly says, thanks for the content. You bet.
So already we are cherry picking the aspects of God traditionally and saying, Matt has these particular aspects that I also attribute to God. And I agree. I just don't have the other ones. And those are the ones that I want justification for.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir. You have to move up the mic, I believe. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
So the question is for Matt. So why is the language of secular humanism, these values that you just espoused or talked about, why is that better than religious language? And then for Travis Peterson, why would religious language be better than those values?
Yeah, and I don't want to be overly pedantic about, I don't know that the language is necessarily better. The ideals of secular humanism have the goal of getting better. The foundation, if you read, and there's various versions of the Secular Humanist Manifesto, and I have disagreements with all of them, and but the nice thing is that there are revisions. Okay, this is one of the biggest benefits of a model, is how do you convince somebody that Christianity is right? Well, there's coercion, conversion, conquest. How do you
Example.
Sorry?
Example.
Okay.
That's an important one.
Okay. I'll have to think on that some more, because a lot of the things that people do that they think are exemplary or examples of Christianity, I don't think that they're in any way not necessarily tied to Christianity. Like it's not. There's nothing a Christian could do that is good that I couldn't also do. And so the example thing doesn't work. But with secular humanism, it is through debate, discussion, data, and convincing people. It's not like we're running around saying, we're going to conquer and install this here. We're not going to make a proclamation that we have the one true right answer. The position that secular humanism takes is, as far as we can tell, we get one life. If there's more, hey, bonus, show us, we'll be convinced.
Thinking Sapien says, don't ignore me, dude. I'm cool, I promise. Did I ignore you? Oh, Thinking Sapien says, Pangburn, we will watch this on a headset someday on air-powered respirator with internet and a mouse controlled by the tongue. What?
It seems that we are, as human beings, as agents, stuck here trying to figure out the best way to live this life. And so we must rely on ourselves and not make appeals to supernatural agents that we can't demonstrate or that don't seem to intervene on our behalf. And if they exist, they're free to come in and step up and tell us where we're doing it wrong. But for now, we're just going to try to do the best we can with what we have to make the world a better place. That's the foundation.
Ron Fan 69 says, getting better sounds a lot like Soviet communism. No. Thinking Ron Fan 69 says, super creature and thinking sapient, you are low IQ degenerates. God. Vic Vaughn says, getting better is Soviet communism, please. LOL. Flavius says the Soviet Union was just about ready to start the real communism before they collapsed. They just needed like a couple more weeks. Garrett Jacob says, if getting better sounds like communism to you, then I really hope you are joking. Um, and yeah, it's the Soviets. It's not about getting better at getting better. It's about like a religion. This is the ideas we have of how to be the best, and we're going to make sure everyone adheres to that. That's why Matt said it's like a religious system. Uh, yeah, it's not like secular humanism, which is about getting better at getting better. It's like everything on the table is up for debate and discussion. That's not the way the Soviets operated.
Of secular humanism, not any proclamation that we've got it right.
So I would say that the primary religious language, insofar as there is such a thing, it's something I tried to detail in Maps of Meaning, which is the first book I wrote. It's a very complicated book. But religious propositions are, in some sense, abstracted generalizations about what being consists of and how to act in it. It's not the same thing as a set of hypotheses about material reality. And it's partly because in the religious domain, the moral imperative is primary, whereas in the empirical domain, the factual domain is primary, or the sensory domain is primary, something like that. So the question from the religious perspective is something like, how should we best construe the world if we wish to determine how to act properly within it? And the way that language is developed, it's developed as a consequence of an evolutionary process, both biological and cultural. And it's culminated in a set of stories, essentially, that have characters. The characters basically represent something like the permanently unknowable. And so that's the mystery that surrounds us all. And that would be associated, say, with the potential of the future and the potential in you. The part of being that's transcendent, right, that constantly escapes from your theorizing. That's the unknown. It's like unexplored territory for animals. And it's a permanent part of being. So there's unexplored territory, the unknown, and there's explored territory, the religious landscape. That's yin and yang. That's chaos and order. Interestingly enough, it looks like it's to that landscape that our brain has adapted, because the right hemisphere looks like it's roughly responsible for processing chaos and the unknown, and the left hemisphere roughly responsible for processing the known and the familiar. And that's on good evidence. If you don't want to take my word for it, you can read Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, which is quite masterful treatment of the neuropsychological literature. And so that's the religious domain, yin and yang, chaos and order. And it places human beings at the center of that. And the idea is that we're always confronted by what we understand and have to adapt to that, even in its tyrannical manifestation. And we're always faced with the permanent reality of the permanently incomprehensible that can burst into our life at any moment and disrupt it. That's reality. And then the religious question is, if that's reality, how do you orient yourself in relationship to those two permanent domains? And the answer to that is something like, pursue the instinct of meaning. Because it looks like meaning is the instinctive response, neuropsychologically grounded in the orienting reflex, I would say, which is a very primordial reflex to the unknown. Meaning is the response that orients us in that world. And so when we're engaged in a meaningful enterprise, it's a signal from the deepest elements of our biological being that we have the balance between what we know and makes us secure and what we don't know and have yet to explore properly sync. And that makes us secure, but not totalitarian.
So Jordan's displaying what I think is wrong with how we view consciousness and how we go about the ought question. He's putting so much weight on the responsibility and the abilities we have as an entity to deal with everything he's talking about. And I'm not saying that the what is aspects of what Jordan is saying is wrong, because it's correct. But the ought question, how we ought to be, it's like the pursuits have to be pleasurable. I don't understand why like this vagueness of like, pursue meaning. It's like the human biological system isn't going to pursue meaning unless it's a pleasurable pursuit. It's not like it can just create that to be a pleasurable pursuit. So when he's talking about the what we ought to do with that information, it's just, I think it's apples and oranges to what is actually what we actually should be talking about. And I think this idea of consciousness meaning generally aware, which I don't think we are just aware of what our pleasure drive allows us to be aware of. Again, consciousness hasn't been demonstrated. This general awareness that the label of consciousness tends to wear.
And engaged, but not terrified. And by staying on that midpoint of balance, that's Tao, by the way, that's the way from the Taoist perspective. By staying on that midpoint, we do what's best for us, what's best for our families, what's best for our community, and God only knows beyond that. We do all of that simultaneously, and we can tell that we're doing that. It speaks to us when we're doing that.
Major Shot says the meaning he talks about is explained as the most engaging pursuit. No, engaging isn't enough. It has to be pleasurable. That's why it's pursuits of pleasure from the pleasure drive. Engaging isn't enough for a pleasure-seeking being.
And that's the deepest of religious instincts. And it's that capability to orient on that border between chaos and order that's exemplified in great mythological heroes like St. George, who goes out to slay the dragon, or Christ, who welcomes death, who embraces mortality and vulnerability and strives forward nonetheless. And there's nothing outside of the religious language that communicates that kind of grandeur. There's nothing that you can use to communicate to people who are in the direst of straits what's most important about life in the manner that will help set them straight and put their soul at peace. So that's the advantage of the religious language.
Vic Vaughn says, how doesn't the pleasure argument fail when one person's pleasure is another's torture? Well, each person has their own pleasure drive, and they're going to move towards what's most pleasurable to them. This is what's going on when billions of calculations are happening per second in the brain. You're only doing things that are pleasurable pursuits. So yeah, it's true that someone might find it pleasurable to kill people or to self-harm, but that doesn't eradicate the argument of the pleasure drive. NY says pleasure is subjective. Yes, and learned. Learned is a tough word in that well, we have to look at it this way. If you mean by learned that we are born with our hardware and the environment around us, including everything we ever learn, everything that we experience is environment. Every time we come into new contacts, then we learn a new pleasure potential, then yes, you're right. Definitely.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you both for a very interesting and revealing exchange. My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You alluded to an important distinction between someone who would actually be an atheist and someone who merely professes to be an atheist. You implied that Matt and others are not genuinely atheists. I'm curious why you think that. Is it just because we have sacred values, that everyone has sacred values? What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. And I can't really come up with a better answer than that, because it's such a complicated question that that's the right answer. You know, I love that book. It's an amazing book, and it's a great thriller, by the way. If there are some of you, perhaps many of you, who haven't read it, you really should read it, because it might be the greatest novel ever written. I think you can make a case for that. It's unbelievably exciting once you get into it. And Raskolnikov, he plots the perfect murder. It's so interesting because Dostoevsky, the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents, let's say. What Dostoevsky did in all of his great novels was make his enemies, let's say, or make each of the positions that he was trying to contend with as powerful and admirable as he possibly could. And since he was an absolutely spectacular genius, he could really do that. And so Raskolnikov plots a murder. And he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable.
Keith Connolly says, welcome to Keith Connolly, by the way. He's one of our moderators. Says, isn't the pleasure drive theory more applicable to the humans of today's society? Wasn't the drive more just survival of the fittest for so long? Survival in itself is a pleasurable pursuit. It's at the foundation of what it means to be alive, be a self-replicating being, to want to spread our genes. It's at the core of that. That is the pleasure drive. It holds strong back to everything. I think it holds strong back to the instincts within an ant or an insect. There is something, and we call it instinctual, and in smaller, in other species we don't call it consciousness. But there's some really primitive form of that has this willingness to succeed, to drive forward. And what is it driving for? It's not just pushing it out into nowhere, driving it out into nowhere with no governance. It's driving it towards something. And the best way I can describe what that thing is, when we look at the general way things want to live, they generally want to be well. They generally want to survive. They generally want to avoid suffering. These are all pleasurable pursuits.
Consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And Raskolnikov, who's also sort of torturing himself, or sort of tortured because he's sort of hungry and not very well, not thinking very clearly, he undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And before he does it, he berates himself.
C. Gritty says, yep, exactly. Being alive is pleasurable compared to not being alive, for this human at least. Yes. And once self-harm and modes of depression start taking over, and then death becomes suicide, or death becomes the epitome of pleasure, in that very close to that moment is when people commit suicide. And the suicide is the epitome of pleasure for them. It's the most pleasurable pursuit. That's why stuff like this happens. We can relate this to all kinds of disorders as well. When things break down, or in addicts, we see it. Thinking Sapien says, at Pangburn, pleasure isn't just about sex. Neither is being overstimulated. Yeah, no. Living healthy, balanced life is a very pleasurable pursuit to many. Having children and raising children, the pleasure you get out of watching your child succeed at a math problem or in a play. It's like these are what I call moral moral pleasure drives. These things. Now, what we can have as well is something, and I'm going to just allude to a little bit of something in my first book. We can have immoral pleasure drifts where an otherwise normal human can have these thoughts that drift into the immoral. For instance, like it's these strange circumstances of sometimes we'll be like at a sky train, and or we'll be driving, and this weird thought of absolute catastrophe will pop into our mind, like, what if that woman was to fall into that train? Or what if I was to accidentally like turn into oncoming traffic? So with immoral pleasure drifts, they come into our mind, and most of us are really good at subduing them. And we just like look at them as like, oh, that was a weird thought. And we all have them. We've all had these weird thoughts where we're like maybe you're really mad at someone and it pops into your mind for a second, just be like, I could just fucking stab that person right now. And then you're like, I thought that for a second, and it was immoral to think that, but I didn't act on it. Now, not everyone, because of things like psychopathy and other things, not everyone has that ability to cast away the immoral pleasure drifts. So, yeah, I hope to communicate this all very clearly, at least the way I see it in my first book, which I'm really excited about.
In what I would describe as the negative atheistic style. And he basically says, look, there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe. Look at all the good I would do. Look at all the well-being I would enhance.
No,
And so he does it.
Jordan's wrong. Well, I mean, the attitude behind it. I'd have to say I just responded to that because I'm thinking of from a foundation when your worldview is based around maximizing well-being for everyone. It includes the crazy woman who you're thinking of taking an axe to. You're not allowed, in my worldview, to, okay, there's this difficult person in society. If she was no longer here, the well-being of everyone would increase 100-fold. So, I mean, we're reasonably justified in killing her, right? No. Her well-being matters just as much as the collective. Now, and this is, of course, a general rule. There will be some anecdotal situations that you'll come up with where reason has to be used to reason through the difficult anecdotal situation. But in general, it's just it's not maximize, minimize in that sense. It's maximizing for everybody across the board.
And then all hell breaks loose. And what Dostoevsky was Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying,
We've got 13
well,
minutes
there's no
left
God.
in this debate, guys.
There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. And there's all these reasons that appear perfectly rational, pushing me in that direction. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule, something that spoke to his own soul, so to speak. And the rest of the book basically involves his sequential post-traumatic unraveling. And the post-traumatic issue is very interesting because one of the things you do see happening with post-traumatic stress disorder is that it very often occurs in people who watch themselves do something of great malevolence by their own admission. I'm not projecting this onto them.
When Jordan starts talking clinical psychology, listen. Jordan does understand the literature better than almost anyone who I've ever heard lecture on any topic in clinical psychology. He's just a master. And what he's doing with self-authoring, you guys should really check out his self-authoring suite, I think is the future of treating I think just treating depression. And obviously depression branches off into many different avenues and issues. But all of these mental health issues basically boil down to a depressed brain. But yeah, check it out. Jordan is brilliant on issues of clinical psychology.
They've watched themselves they've stepped outside the ancient moral code unwittingly and conducted themselves in a manner they cannot reconcile themselves to, and they are permanently broken. So there are works like that, Crime and Punishment, first and foremost, I would say, that do a lovely job of elucidating in narrative form how these self-evident moral presuppositions are necessarily nested inside this broader narrative metaphorical substrate, and that you use your rationality divorced from that metaphorical substrate at your peril. And I believe that to be the case. I think that's an accurate psychological summation.
Thank you. I'm curious if Matt has any thoughts on the matter.
You think?
I have plenty.
So it's rather surprising, and I promise you I don't.
Matt just kills me. Like, Matt's demeanor has always made me laugh. If you guys haven't seen like the classic Atheist Experience episodes when theists call in to argue to give their evidence for the existence of gods, you really have to watch the Atheist Experience with Matt Dillahunty. Like, watch some old compilations or something. You will likely laugh your ass off. He's a very funny guy.
I don't mean this to be insulting, because I definitely place you considerably higher than most of the apologists that I've engaged with. But there's a common theme from the apologists, and that is, you're not really an atheist because. Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, it's, you're not really an atheist because, in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not. From other apologists,
yeah, if you're gonna make that claim about someone, if someone claims I'm an atheist because I lack a belief in a god, it's like that is how the person's defining their atheism. And then if someone's like, you're not an atheist, it's like you've just adopted a very difficult burden of proof to prove that I am not what I've just demonstrated that I am, or I've said that I am.
Apologists, it's, you think you're an atheist, but you're not, because God's written his moral code on your heart. Is what this is essentially, as far as I can tell, what was expressed in some way, that there's a moral foundation, a moral center that God has imbued people with, and that we all know this, or we all recognize it, or you're not really an atheist, or this is what an atheist would do. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things, is independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life. In much the same way that, previously they wanted to kind of say, oh, this is a secular humanist, regime that was just awful. Well, it wasn't secular humanism. There were atheist fans who wrote me that were like, oh man, I can't wait till you do this conversation with Jordan. And I was like, cool. And still, I hope that we have many more conversations as well, because just saying one thing that I find irritating is never going to be enough to get rid of me. But I asked them, great, I'm not that familiar with him. What is it about him that you like, and what are the concerns? And they came back with a bunch of things. None of them said anything about agreeing with views on religion. They seemed very confused on those things. And so the good news for them is that while he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. I know people who identify as Christian atheists. They really love the stuff that Jesus said, but they don't actually believe there's God. Thomas Jefferson famously cut out the Jefferson Bible and removed every reference to the supernatural. and miracles and things like that because he really admired the teachings of it. And sure, I think you could be a cultural Christian in that if you wanted to. It's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time when they come out. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, "You're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time." It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
For the love of God, you guys keep writing, "You're not really a squirrel." It's "you are." You are.
And I hate to tell you, you get the last question for us.
Oh, that's so much more pressure
Sorry.
than I can handle.
They're flagging me.
Okay. You want to talk more about consciousness or more about morality?
It's your question, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Morality? Yeah, all right, fine. So,
Yeah, because that'll be quick.
yeah.
Not like consciousness would have been any quicker.
So, Matt, thanks so much for coming back to Toronto. Always great to hear you talk. Dr. Peterson, thanks for coming.
Okay, I got to answer this.
You seem
Kevin Stewart says, the question is, do atheists live up to their own worldview? Atheism doesn't have a worldview, people. How many times do I have to say this? Atheism, simply put, someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, did you know about this God that exists?" And then I say, "Oh, no, I didn't. What is it?" And then they say, "Look, read this book." And then I say, "Oh, well, how do you know this book is actually talking about something that actually exists? How do you know it's just not a book?" "Oh, well, I just believe that that this is true." "Oh, well, I'm going to need more evidence than that. I'm going to reserve my belief until you have more evidence." That's atheism. That's all it is. There's no tenets, no dogma, no pageantry, no funny hats, no songs. Well, there's a couple songs, but that's all is. That's all it is. There is no worldview. Secular humanism goes along the lines more of a worldview and what you ought to do and how you ought to be, but atheism doesn't tell you anything about that. Atheism is just about your positions that you take when someone has presented gods that they think exist to you.
Sorry, Mr. Peterson, you seem sort of very willing to talk about how evolution and biological underpinnings can influence the meta-narrative down the road that, underpins our lives. But can't it also just be that evolution underpins morality without that extra step? Like, isn't it enough that the only animals that evolved are the ones that didn't die, and the only ones that evolved into a society are the ones that could live in a civilized society? Like, isn't it really clear that there are evolutionary underpinnings to morality and that...
Kevin Stewart says, but don't most atheists subscribe to the evolution theory? Mostly everyone in the world does, and if they don't, they ought to. There's more evidence. There is much evidence for evolutionary theory than there is for gravity. So if you're not subscribing to evolutionary theory, you best get on the scientific bandwagon and start understanding scientific models just to the basic level so that you can understand what it takes to achieve the label of theory in the scientific community. That is it's the highest level of achievement for something to reach, for a model to reach the level of theory. That is how evolution has done. It can't do any better. There's just more, and there continues to be more and more evidence that piles on, more verification methods, and so it's just, Evolution is a thing. Anyone who tries to sell you on creationism or anything like that, none of that crap's been demonstrated. Keith Conley says, I used to get so annoyed by the argument that we can't separate ourselves from Judeo-Christian values. Yeah, that's just stupid. That's just people trying to build fear around what you're going to lose if you don't call yourself a Christian, or you don't hang on to Judeo-Christian values, or you don't practice this dogma all the time. That's all that is.
There are animals that display morality, and that it's not just humans. We're really good at it, but we're not the only ones.
Deepak says, Pangburn is really milking the watch party shit. I swear I've seen Dillahunty versus Peterson like 9 times now. Well, then you're counting things. We only do watch party once. This is the 3rd episode because it takes us a while to get through the whole event.
Well, I would say certainly the last part of your statements are true, is that you can
Judeo-Christian values. Don't eat shellfish.
see what like morality in some sense is an emergent property of group interactions. It's more complicated than that, because it's group interactions across time. It's more complicated than that. You see the clear underpinnings of morality in animals. Sure. You're asking, does there have to be something metaphysical beyond that?
No, I'm saying what
okay.
seems metaphysical to us is just because we're like really faulty analyzers of the real world, like the whole shadows in the grass, type 1 and, like false positives, false negatives. But like, why we wouldn't be a society if we were just naturally disposed to being immoral? Like, morality is entirely selfish. It's really good for me to be moral because my life's really good that way. And it makes me feel really good to be nice to other people. If it felt like shit to be nice to other people, I wouldn't do it.
Well, it
so
does
we evolved
sometimes.
to be moral. There's a reason it...
Take a second to hit that like button, guys. I really appreciate it if you do. And remember to subscribe. New content all the time. Watch parties. Oh, for the next watch party, what event should we do next? I've been kind of thinking Dawkins versus Brett Weinstein. So we can go down the evolutionary rabbit hole. What do you guys think?
It makes us feel good.
Well, okay. Look, I'm going to refer to Jung again. Jung did hypothesize that the God, he talked a lot about the God image in human.
Ferdy Ernest, welcome back, says, here we are again, a bit late. Really nice, this concept, Travis. Awesome. Yeah, welcome back. And Deepax, I wasn't trying to be a dick to you. I know you probably see Jordan Peterson versus Matt all the time, but I hope you subscribe. I hope you hang out more. But yeah, we only do the watch parties through once for each video. But all of the watch parties we've done, guys, you can find them on the channel.
Human beings, which was distinct from God. And you could say, let's go back to the psychedelic issue. You could say that people can have intense mystical experiences, even intense mystical experiences of a deity directly, let's say, because that does happen, without that being construed as evidence for the existence.
Christy Santiago says, I appreciate how Pangburn takes its time. It really goes through into analyzing these debates, which are covering topics that I find fascinating. Awesome. Thanks, Christy. Really appreciate it. Don't spam the chat, guys.
Of a deity, right? The religious instinct could be built so deep into us that we can't get outside it, even if it's just a materialistic instinct.
Well,
that
some
is
of
a
us can get
possibility.
outside it. Like, I'm outside of it. And,
Let him finish, because we're out of time.
Oh, well, and I don't really know how to distinguish between those things. I'm not even sure that you can distinguish between them. Now, do I have anything else to say about that in closing? No, I guess I don't. I mean, I tried to lay out these views, the answer to your question, in detail in my first book. It's about 600 pages long. And it's really, 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 really hard. But it does address what you're asking. And I don't think there's a real simpler way of doing it. I didn't find one.
I only have a couple things to add before we close this out. First of all, I have no idea how long my first book's going to be, but it won't be 600 pages.
Flavius Magni says, I heard Weinstein's brother Eric bitching in his podcast about how Dawkins treated Brett unfairly. Haha. Yeah, I would like to hear that, actually. I'd like to hear that clip. I'm probably going to go and find it.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Also, I don't think I have anything specific to tag on to your question, because I get the impression that we're likely on this similar pages, because I think that the moral, cultural aspects of this are something that happen naturally. We observe in other primates senses of fairness. And the key cornerstones for morality, from my perspective, while I gave an outline for a secular moral system, the foundations of that are empathy and the desire to have a good life. And the
Kool-Aid says, would you ever do a watch along with the Sam Harris debate? Yeah, of course. We've done the whole series, part 1 through 4. I think it was 12, maybe. I would say we've done 30 hours of Sam Harris events already in our watch parties. You can find them on the channel here.
last note is one time when I was on LSD, I was staring at the wood grain on the bathroom door. I don't know why I was in the bathroom, but I was there. And from the wood grain on the bathroom door, an image formed. This is not a joke. It was a strawberry with an S on its chest, and a face and a cape. And Super Strawberry flew off that bathroom door and did a lap around my head before it smacked right into the door and became wood grain again. Coolest trip ever. And despite that, I don't think it points to the reality of Super Strawberry or his abilities. And because that was an incredibly unfair applause line to end the night with, I'd like to let Dr. Peterson give one last remark, and then we will thank you all and say goodnight. So if you have anything to add or close with on anything we've discussed this evening.
Well, I only have one thing to say. I mean, I'm very pleased, for what that's worth, that these sorts of discussions are taking place and that there's an avid public audience for them. It's like, great, you know? Yeah.
And on that note of complete agreement, thank you guys so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you sometimes. We'll come back through. Cheers.
Great job. Thank you.
Guys, we made it. We made it through. And look at that. You can click on my mushroom picking documentary right here. I'll give you guys a quick sneak preview. We do have some documentaries on the channel as well. Monkeys grow in Canada, China, Estonia, Finland, Japan, Korea, Norway, the United States, Poland, and Sweden, among other countries. I want to do a few more nature things, but for those of you who don't know, I grew up in the mountainous regions of British Columbia, and one thing I did growing up was harvesting pine matsutake mushrooms. But if you want to learn more about that and watch some of our documentaries, you can find them on the channel. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys showing up for this. This was unannounced, just kind of impromptu to get through this, and we did it. We got through the Jordan Peterson versus Matt Dillahunty debate conversation. It was awesome. And sure, why don't we move into Brett Weinstein versus Richard Dawkins on evolution. They meet some points of contention. They're interesting. There is a chunk of that video that is gone forever because of technical fuck-ups. But we'll watch through, and we can all get pissed off at where that occurs in the video. But anyways, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys showing up today. As always, let art and science inspire, and hit that like button. Thanks, guys.